If there's one group of people who have always been relevant in American pop culture, it's the Founding Fathers. From being featured on Currency, to having multiple Broadway musicals written about them, the Founding Fathers of the United States have been glorified by the media for centuries. However, in recent years, these men have started getting new reputations. It seems that their histories as womanizers, racists, and slave owners have been discussed just as much as their founding of an entirely new country. This begs the question, how should we view our founding fathers? This information about the flaws and failures of these men has always been known, so why is it just becoming prevalent now? The short answer is that morals have changed. After hundreds of years, the majority of Americans hold at least somewhat differing ideals from those of the Founding Fathers. To provide some insight on how teaching of the Founding Fathers has changed in schools, we've asked a local high school social studies teacher about his own experiences in the classroom, both learning and teaching about the Founding Fathers. Although, in many cases, the Founding Fathers are now viewed in a somewhat negative light, there is one massive pop cultural phenomenon that has brought the Founding Fathers back to life in a sense. Hamilton, the 2015 Broadway musical about the life of Alexander Hamilton. Although the show pointed out many of the flaws of Hamilton and his fellow Founding Fathers, the revamped versions of these men were soon deeply romanticized by popular culture. Lesser known historical sites, such as the Schuyler Mansion in Albany, New York, reported that the Hamilton craze increased their monthly number of visitors nearly tenfold. It seemed that, instead of truly bringing their flaws to light, the show made the Founding Fathers into lovable caricatures to its audience. The musical Hamilton was loved specifically by teenagers, who had never seen the Founding Fathers portrayed in such a way that made them seem cool to that age group. This largely affected the younger demographic's view of the Founding Fathers, turning them from dusty historical figures to rapping stage characters. This, in turn, largely glorified their dramatized lives to the younger generation, hindering the spreading idea that the Founding Fathers weren't very good people at all. The rise of negative ideas surrounding the Founding Fathers comes at an interesting point in our history. People are mistrusting the government more now than ever. Data from the Pew Research Center says that less than 2 in 10 Americans trust their Washington politicians to do what's right most of the time. This is at an all-time low, and it has been since around 2007. When data on federal government trust was first collected in 1958 by the Federal Election Committee, about 75% of Americans said that they trusted their federal politicians. This then plummeted severely in the 1960s with the United States' involvement in the Vietnam War, and continued to go downhill with the Watergate scandal in the 1970s. Public trust went up again in the 80s, but soon fell in the 90s again. After the September 11th attacks on 2001, public trust was at an all-time high again, but soon after started declining and has since been going down. This seems to be around the time, 2007, that people stopped liking the Founding Fathers completely and shifted towards more of a negative view. All right. Now let's examine one of the Founding Fathers with the more lethal reputation, Thomas Jefferson. Throughout his lifetime, he enslaved over 600 people, yet he condemned slavery, calling it a moral depravity and a hideous blot. But he still contributed to the issue. People have always known of this, but he's become less and less glorified over time as society's morals have changed. We've seen recently that racists and Confederate soldiers have had statues that have been torn down because society's morals and views of them are changing. In the case of the Founding Fathers, this shift towards better morals has proven to be bad for them. But we can argue that it's been good for society. This reflects the change that we don't idolize the same people that we used to, which shows that we as society are becoming more morally correct. Though the information on the villainous nature of the United States Founding Fathers has always been available, it's just recently become popular and well known. Now that this is being taught in schools from this viewpoint, we can become better as a society and make things better for the next generations to come. Through the help of historians and experts, we as Americans can become better informed on our Founding Fathers and the flawed lives that they lived. Okay. So what was the general idea that you were taught about the Founding Fathers, like in elementary school?
That they were a bunch of higher, strong people, and they all got together and made a constitution, and that's really it.
Okay, did you learn anything about their lives, what they did for work?
No. I only learned what they did that was relevant to the government of America.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And did you learn about many of them that owned plantations, like Thomas Jefferson?
No.
Okay, thank you. Cameron, I really appreciate this. Okay, so what were you taught about the Founding Fathers in elementary school?
I'm not sure. It's been a while.
All right. Do you remember talking about their morals, things that they would say about other people?
I don't think I ever got taught that.
All right. Well, you've heard the phrase, all men are created equal.
Yes.
Which was written by Thomas Jefferson. Now, did you know that Thomas Jefferson was a plantation owner and he enslaved over 600 people within his lifetime?
Yes.
You did know that?
Yes.
Were you taught that in school or on your own?
I think I was taught that in school, but it was for 5 minutes. They just kind of passed it by us.
Okay, thank you. The current societal dislike of the Founding Fathers also comes at an interesting time because of the rise of critical race theory being taught in United States public schools. Previously, students were only taught that white history was all of history, but in recent years, public schools have started teaching history from different perspectives. For us in the United States, this means that the stories of enslaved individuals from centuries ago are coming to light on a much larger scale than ever before. However, not everyone is on board with teaching critical race theory. The Institute for Policy Research at Northwestern University reports that nearly 3/4 of Americans across all different demographics are concerned with how United States history is taught in public schools. While 52% of those surveyed agreed that racism and its roots should be taught in school, only 27% fully support the teaching of critical race theory in public schools. But the seed for representation in history classes all across America for everyone has already been planted, although it angers some that it uproots many famous historical figures in the process. How history is taught in public schools in the United States has become a very polarizing issue, especially within the past decade or so. Says political scientist James Druckmann, quote, "The partisan and racial divides are not surprising, but accentuate why CRT has become such a political flashpoint."
Are you gonna cut that out?
Yes.
Okay.
So what were you taught about the Founding Fathers in school?
Not much, to be honest. Really nothing.
So you weren't taught that they were racist, they were slave owners?
No.
Did you learn that on your own?
Mm-hmm.
Can you provide some extra words?
Yes, I did projects on them, and I did my own research, and I found out that they were slave owners.
But it was never really discussed in class?
No.
Okay, thank you. So how can we as individuals work to better ourselves as United States citizens? While preserving our nation's history is important, the glorification of people who did things no longer considered morally correct doesn't have to be. In the 21st century, the federal government has taken steps to highlight previously marginalized groups of people on a national platform. For example, the American Women Quarters Program, in association with the United States Mint, is a series of quarters being released from 2022 to 2025, depicting women who are important to United States history. 5 new designs have been unveiled each year of the program thus far. But the federal government finally lifting up historical figures besides just the affluent white men of history isn't going to ensure that generations to come will learn of the good and bad sides of our nation's history. The first step to doing this is being open to exploring all sides and perspectives of history. To those of you who already practice this, great job. To those of you who don't normally consider different viewpoints throughout history, give it a try. You'll learn a lot. Unsurprisingly, teaching kids to appreciate and accept other ideas and viewpoints is an excellent tool for both in the classroom and at home. Though educators and parents alike are so divided on what should be taught in schools these days, starting with appreciation and acceptance leads to more productive future citizens for our country. In recent years, it seems that we've lost all sense of respect for the other side. In a world where everything seems divided, be open-minded. Exploring history with an open mind helps people understand all sides of the story. So, yes, we should consider our founding fathers with open minds. But raising them up as the perfect founders just contradicts every flaw they had. We as a society can recognize these men as political masterminds who founded a country and wrote some of the most widely renowned political writings in the world, while also recognizing the fact that they were not great people at all from a moral standpoint. And a lot of what they said about slavery did not match up with their actions at all. For example, Thomas Jefferson writing the famous line that all men are created equal, and then enslaving over 600 people within his lifetime. I feel like in more recent years, we have learned more than ever that the founding fathers were huge hypocrites. So what else can be done to make sure our perceptions of history are as accurate as possible? Learning absolutely everything you can about history. Visits to historical homes, sites, parks, museums, and monuments are all great ways to see and hear about history in person. Trust me, history is so much more interesting when you're in a place it actually happened. Overall, public trust has to be put in historians, people who know what they're talking about. As new research comes to light about the Founding Fathers, the responsible thing to do as an American citizen is to learn about it. In order to keep our society up and running, our citizens must be educated. Now, this has become a bit of a less popular opinion lately, with many American voters admitting to voting completely uninformed. In addition to this, we live in what MIT's Sloan School of Management calls a partisan echo chamber, which means that we consume news that confirms our own biases and opinions. This is so incredibly harmful to the concept of open-mindedness and makes it easier to avoid our own views being challenged. Something that has always interested me is the question, who was the most morally correct founding father? Is there one? The facts point at Samuel and John Adams. Neither were slave owners, participated in extramarital affairs, or were trying to make America's political system into a reformed monarchy, like Alexander Hamilton was. However, this is a pretty low bar, at least by today's standards. So what were you taught about the Founding Fathers when you were in school in the 70s and 80s?
Well, we were taught that the Founding Fathers were generally a group of men that were very glorified in the way that they put together the articles of the country and how they formed the government, and they were made to be almost like a superhero status, when we were in school.
Mm-hmm. So when did you find out that, they were plantation owners, they were racist, they really weren't very morally correct at all?
Probably some of that later in like high school classes. You started to learn a lot more in depth about what they actually did in addition to the formation of the country.
Mm-hmm. Has touring historical homes and sites really helped with your envisioning the different historical perspectives?
Yes, Monticello in particular was very illuminating because now they have an entire section dedicated to the slaves, the slave quarters, their roles, how prominent they were in the functioning of the entire place. So yes, very much so.
When I was in elementary school, I was taught that the Founding Fathers were almost like gods in American society. They were moral, just, and wise. My first experience with learning about the moral faults of these men was honestly when I got really into Hamilton in 7th grade. From there, my musical obsession spiraled into a historical obsession. Reading everything I could about this group of men and learning about their lives, the good and the bad, became something that occupied many of my days in middle school.